Could we have your attention, please? Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Philippe Cloutier, and I'm a fourth-year student here at the business school, Telfer School of Management. Thank you. I'm also soon transitioning into the financial industry.
Bonjour, je me présente, Anaïs Elboujdaini, candidate à la maîtrise en sciences politiques et représentante étudiante au bureau des gouverneurs de l'Université d'Ottawa. Nous aimerions commencer en remerciant tous les étudiants et les étudiantes ici présents, les professeurs, les membres de l'administration de l'université et des différentes facultés, ainsi que les panélistes pour votre présence aujourd'hui à ce séminaire.
We would like to thank you all for attending. Please feel free to tweet the event, #UofO_ethical. We have come a long way since the days when Milton Friedman started a debate when declaring that businesses' only social responsibility was to generate wealth and increase shareholder value. We believe that business is capable of much more, and we have seen just this with the trend of the financial services industry's social and ethical investing practices. Portfolios with social investment started as early as the 1980s, which according to the Social Investment Forum, were worth around $14 billion in assets under management. This number grew to $639 billion a decade later and to $2.3 trillion in 2001.
En tant qu'étudiante et étudiants préoccupés par notre futur, nous voulons questionner le rôle du secteur privé dans ses pratiques éthiques, sociales et environnementales en termes d'investissement. Nous voulons arrimer les meilleures pratiques à l'œuvre qui sont en ce moment à l'Université d'Ottawa en termes d'investissement responsable. Et c'est pour ça que nous comptons déposer une motion au bureau des gouverneurs afin que l'Université d'Ottawa collabore avec la communauté universitaire quand il est question d'investissement social pour ses fonds de pension et de dotation. C'est cette volonté d'agir sur ces questions qui nous concernent tous et toutes qui nous a encouragés à organiser ce séminaire.
As students preoccupied with our future, we wish to continue the debate on the role of private enterprise and its social responsibility to apply social, ethical, and environmental best practices. We created this initiative to involve the university's community into this conversation. Students are interested in alternative investment options that take into account social, ethical, and environmental considerations. We plan on presenting to the Board of Governors of the University of Ottawa a motion aiming to increase collaboration between the students and the university's pension and endowment fund with principles of responsible investing. Thank you. I would now like to introduce to you our first guest speaker who will set the Canadian context of social and impact investing. He is a co-founder and partner at Purpose Capital, where he advises investors, foundations, financial institutions, such as pension funds, to align their investment strategies with their social impact objectives. He is a co-author of Accelerating Impact, Achievements, Challenges, and What's Next in Building the Impact Investing Industry. He also teaches social entrepreneurship at the University of Toronto, and he is a senior research associate at the Carleton Center for Community Innovation at Carleton University. We forgive him for that. Please join us in welcoming Kareem Harji.
So thank you for the generous introduction. I think there's a few of us from Carleton, so if we have to kind of band together, yeah, one, two, maybe a couple more. Okay, we've got a crowd. It's not too bad. Tessa, you're our leader de facto, so save us from whatever may happen later on. But thank you guys. for being here. It's really great to see so much interest from the community here. Having done a couple of talks recently at Carleton, and just seeing how Carleton also, the student base, as well as virtually every university in Canada, there's a ton of interest coming from students, but also from faculty, from administrators. And hopefully what I can provide today is a bit more of a context of what's happening across the country, a little bit of what's happening across the world in this area, and then give you maybe some inspiration in terms of, at the university, what you could do in terms of channeling that interest into things that hopefully will carry you into your career paths, or maybe even your time here at the university. So I'm going to start with a bit of an overview of social finance and impact investing. I apologize, first of all, in that my speech is only going to be in English, so you can ask me questions in French, but it's going to be really bad responses, so I'll try and respond as best as I can, but I'm happy to take questions after this as well. So what is this topic or concept of social finance? First of all, how many people in the audience, maybe just a quick show of hands, have heard of the term social finance or impact investing? Okay, so this is great to see. I mean, if I asked this question even 2 years ago, there would be a couple of people in the room. They're not all the people that went to Carleton as well, so just so we're clear. But this is symbolic of what's happening across this country. More people are understanding the concept, both in terms of the term, as well as in terms of what it means, both in terms of how they invest, how they shop, how they interact with the organizations that they work with and give to. So social finance is really the whole entity. The definition is that finance can do more than just provide a financial return. When you invest, you can also do good for communities, for society, for causes that matter to you and to others. Whereas traditionally, the whole capitalism debate has been about making money for money's sake, in a sense, if I want to simplify that. Today, we recognize that it's about much more than that, that there are non-financial considerations, social, environmental, governance, that actually matter in terms of how capital is allocated. And so when we define impact investing, it's really the provision of some form of capital to intentionally generate social value, whether it's for businesses or communities. There's also the expectation that there will be some type of financial return, but also that the impact must be measurable. And that's a big area of study and discussion that I think many of you are also thinking about. How would you actually think about the impact that you're creating, and how would you measure it? How would you compare it across different types of investments? Those are hopefully some of the questions that we'll get to in the panel discussion. But recently, I was part of a team that did this report called The State of the Nation, Impact Investing in Canada. It's available online at purposecap.com. We basically looked at the full range of activity happening across the country. Where is the capital coming from in terms of individuals, people like yourselves, foundations, government? Where's the capital going to? Where are some of the businesses, the projects, the companies that are looking for capital? And then how does capital and opportunity connect? So we talk a little bit more about this in the report, and I'm going to provide a bit of a snapshot tonight. There's this question around how you measure the impact, as well as what the role of government is. I think at least some of you are either working for or will be working in government. Despite the fact that this is a lot about business principles being embedded into social aspects, government plays a really important role in setting the rules of the game. And so it's really important for us to understand ways in which government can help or hinder a lot of what we're going to talk about. And finally, who's going to actually lead in this space? And it's going to be many of you in the room. Because as I said, even a few years ago, there would be very few hands that would have gone up. The fact that most of you in this room have heard of the term is, for me at least, a really good sign that we're moving in the right direction. So I'll just put a few points from the report. I won't try and cover the entire report because it's just about 100 pages and you don't want to be here all evening. These guys have much more interesting things to say, so I want them to get up here as well. But one of the things to remember is that we're actually pretty fortunate as a country in that Canada has a very rich history of social finance. The credit union movement, and Rosalie will talk a little bit about that, has been an important driver of a lot of this activity. It's unique to Canada in that many other countries don't have the robustness of the credit union sector that we have. But as you'll see, and you may notice some of the terms up there around microfinance, community economic development, the social economy. Across in Quebec, there's a ton of activity that I think we'll talk to a little bit later in the panel as well. So we're building on a rich history, which again is really good for Canada. The second thing that characterized what we found in our research is that we're a big country. Provinces have their own way of doing things. We're very fortunate to have a diversity of approaches and activity across social finance, both in terms of how investors make investments, as well as the types of companies and businesses and how they integrate social value. So in some provinces, for example, affordable housing is a big issue. You're seeing a lot of interest in how large investors, pension funds, et cetera, are trying to fund affordable housing, but being very cognizant of the social impact that it has on families and on communities. On the other hand, you have renewable energy. Some of you are familiar with a lot of the forms of renewable energy. That's a pretty big business here in Canada. And part of the challenge is how do you make it local and how do you make it relevant to every one of us in terms of the choices we have in terms of how we get our power. So it's all the way from the institutional big pension fund level to every one of you. Right? Every one of you has a choice, for example, when you walk into your bank, and you could go to Desjardins, because they actually will ask you the question. Are you a financial institution? Because they are a credit union. They will ask you the question of whether you care about, what values you care about. And that's not a question you often get asked by your advisor when you go and open up an account. But hopefully many of you are asking that question when you go and open up your account to say, well, I actually give to this charity, or I'm really interested in getting better educational outcomes for certain types of groups. Well, can I invest in a similar way? They have an answer. Probably most other financial institutions are still thinking about that. So I think that gives you a sense of the diversity of approaches. One of the things we did in the report is try to look at, where's the money coming from and what kinds of products are out there. One of the things you'll hear maybe on this panel as well is that for the average person, they don't think there's a lot of opportunities to actually make investments. And that's still largely true. But we found at least 45 different kinds of products in the marketplace. And so, again, for us, that's a really good sign of a marketplace that is growing and increasingly getting much more robust and vibrant, even though we still have a long way to go. As I talked about, one of the other things that we look at on the financial side is if you're interested in investing, let's say, in public debt, for some of the business students in the room, you'll recognize this slide. How do you invest across asset classes? If you're an institutional investor, those kinds of things matter to you. We're, again, seeing much more activity across asset classes. This is only a snapshot of what we've been able to find, but we know there's a lot more involved as well. But what's important, I think, for maybe a lot of you who are thinking about different career paths is that social finance can be embedded in a lot of different sectors. We did an analysis of each of these 9 sectors and looked at where you can embed social finance. So, for example, we talked about renewable energy, but let's talk about education, for a second. We've got a pretty good, relative to most other countries, a good education system here. So what we're finding is there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are looking for better outcomes in terms of teaching math, for example. For some of you who've been following the news, apparently we're not doing so well in our math rankings, but what can we do about that? Can we invest in new approaches to teaching math, and have them be embedded within the system, assuming that they work? Well, some of you who are actually studying math probably have some ideas around how to do that. If we look at sustainable agriculture, the organic food sector as a whole, there's a lot of demand, but are investors paying attention to that as well? So we took a look at some examples in each of these sectors of specific enterprises. And for those of you that are entrepreneurs or looking to maybe start up a company or considering that route, this will hopefully give you some ideas around where there's a bit of action, for lack of a better word, but also where there are opportunities and other models for you to take a look at. And so I'm happy to, again, provide additional examples if people have an interest. One of the things that I think the panel will talk about as well is many of us work at the intersection of capital and opportunity. There's a lot of groups that need capital. There's also a lot of capital out there. There's actually more capital than I think we know what to do with. The magic happens in the middle in terms of capital and opportunity. And you've got financial institutions, you've got universities that are really intentionally building the connections between the two. And so we profiled some of those organizations. And again, for those of you who are looking at career paths in this space, this is another area to look at how you could engage in this area. So it's not only providing capital or seeking capital, but finding ways to connect the dots more clearly. Since we're in Ottawa, and there's at least a few government folks here, we also looked at how government either helps or does not in this space. And for many of you in business, you know that governments always seem to be providing too many regulations and too many rules. In some cases, it can actually be helpful. If basically government said something like, every business must report on its social impact. Just doing that would change the landscape of how businesses think about what their roles are in society. So things like that government can actually play an interesting role around, and we looked at that in the report in terms of where government can directly provide support, as well as where government can actually influence the outcomes and play the rules. So again, I went through this fairly quickly just to give you a bit of a snapshot of the range of things that are happening across the country. It's a little hard to capture much more than that, in the time that I have. But I want to spend a few minutes just talking about universities. As someone who teaches, and I've taught at a business school and currently at an engineering school, I do research with Tessa at Carleton. Certainly, there's a lot, as I mentioned, a lot more interest, but not only from students. Faculty, administrators, people that fund universities and donate to universities are also very interested. So I'm going to provide a few examples of where I think there's some good things that are happening in Canada, but also to provoke you a little bit in terms of what things you should be thinking about. In terms of the motion that's going to the board, maybe there's a few other things you could add on to that submission as well. So the first, as I mentioned, there's a big group here. Many of you are interested in this topic. Well, there's a lot of people like you across the country. This group is from McGill. They won what's called a HULT Prize. It was $1 million, and I believe it was last year. It was a competition around social entrepreneurship. And a HULT Prize does a different theme every year. But a Canadian group won this last year. And it's $1 million. They have an interesting idea that you could Google and find out a little bit more about. But this is already happening. Canadian universities are working at the international level to engage their students. Well, think about creative ways that students here, you guys, can actually be involved, whether it's international competitions, local competitions. There's a lot of pitch competitions for entrepreneurs that are looking to sell their ideas that you could be involved in. So I think universities can certainly do much more of that. I think the second role is that universities are fairly grounded in their local communities, or at least they should be. This is just a graphic around food insecurity. Surprisingly, we still have issues around food insecurity among children in Canada. This is not something we should be thinking about. It's not something we do think about, right? You don't think that 1 in 5 kids, in your typical province actually has issues around where they would get their next meal. It's not something it's not the first thing we wake up and think about. Well, there are entrepreneurs that are thinking about how to address that. Because today we have much more food than we could all eat. It's not a food production problem. In some cases, it's a food distribution problem. And so how can you use, for example, the logistics that a UPS or a Walmart or Amazon can provide and apply it to food security? That's an interesting question to solve, particularly for an engineer, because you can think about the systems. So I think focusing on community is really important because at the end of the day, this is about impact. It's not just about the money. The third is universities can, obviously as they do, increase the quality and just quantity of teaching and research. This is a word cloud from an initiative that Tessa is actually heading. It's a CURA, it's a Community University Research Alliance that I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about. It's about 33 institutions, if I'm right, both in Canada as well as globally, that are focusing on responsible investing and impact investing. So there's a rich set of data, a rich set of teaching and learning that's occurring not only in Canada but across the country. All of your profs, I know George is already doing this, should be engaged in this subject matter in one way or another, and they can't basically say that nobody else is doing it because there's a vibrant group of people that are. And finally, maybe I'll leave this because it's a bit more of a provocative question, and I think it's going to come up a little bit later, is today universities think that the way they should be engaging in this stuff is an odd initiative here, a program there, maybe a nice shiny building, and all those things are great. but they've got big, big endowments. And how many of you know where the endowments are being invested? All of you are paying into it in some way or another. Has anybody asked the question of where the endowments go today? Are they invested in ways that are consistent with what you believe in? Are they invested in ways that are consistent with the university mission? Those are the questions, again, that I know at least some of the panelists are thinking and working on. And again, there's a vibrant stream of activity globally around saying it's not just about divesting. You know, if we're concerned about investing in nuclear or oil and gas companies, that's fine. We could remove assets from there if that's one direction. But can we reward good behavior? Can we deliberately invest in student ventures? Can we deliberately invest in things that are good for the world? And universities, can they actually begin to move in that direction? So again, I know some of the folks here are working on that, so I'll let them talk a little bit more about that. But you know, those are my kind of opening remarks, just to provide you with a bit of an overview. Hopefully this was helpful. You know, download the report, which will give you a lot more insight, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on. So thank you.
Merci, Karim. Nous allons maintenant laisser la parole à Penelope Simons, qui sera la modératrice pour le reste de cette discussion. Penelope est professeure agrégée en Common Law à l'Université d'Ottawa. Ses intérêts de recherche portent sur la responsabilité des industries, sur la question des droits humains, ainsi que sur le développement responsable des entreprises en zone de faible gouvernance.
We now leave the floor to our moderator, Penelope Simons, professor at the Common Law faculty here at the University of Ottawa. Penelope has been engaged in research on corporate human rights accountability for over a decade. In December 1999, she participated in the Canadian Assessment Mission to Sudan, appointed by Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, to investigate allegations of slavery as well as links between oil development in Sudan and violations of human rights. Just this morning, she has launched a new book for which she is co-author called The Governance Gap: Extractive Industries, Human Rights, and the Home State Advantage. Please join us in welcoming Penelope Simons.
Merci Philippe, merci Anis. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's nice to see so many people interested in this topic. I'm going to introduce our panelists, just their names and where their associations, and then ask each of them to spend about 2 or 3 minutes talking about the work that they do that's related to socially responsible investment. And then we are going to, we have a series of questions to ask the panelists, which they'll answer, and that will go on for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the floor for questions. So directly to my left, we have Madame Rosalie Vendette. She is the socially responsible investment senior advisor at Desjardins, at the Desjardins Group's marketing wealth management team, when she develops and implements social responsible investment strategies. And she's worked in socially responsible investing for 10 years. And then just on the other side of Karim, we have Dr. Tessa Hebb, who is the director of the Carleton Center for Community Innovation and chair of the steering committee of the United Nations-backed Principles for Responsible Investment Academic Network. And then next to her is Nancy Kite, who is the senior portfolio manager in Treasury at Export Development Canada. She's responsible for raising funds in the global capital markets to fund the needs of corporations. And together with her funding colleagues, she was responsible for the issuance of EDC's first green bond, which we'll be interested in hearing about today. And finally, on the far left is Cameron Fenton. He is the national director of the Climate Youth Climate Coalition. So please welcome our guests, and I'll ask to start with Rosalie Vendette to introduce herself and talk a little bit about what she does.
C'est beaucoup? Ah oui, OK. Français, anglais. I'll start with French, and then I'll switch to English. je voulais réagir au titre d'abord parce qu'on parle d'une nouvelle approche en termes d'investissement. Et puis, pour ceux qui ne savent pas, le mouvement Desjardins s'est lancé dans l'aventure de l'investissement socialement responsable en 1990. Alors, pour nous, ce n'est pas si nouveau que ça. Ça existe depuis très longtemps. Et pour faire un parcours très accéléré entre 1990 et maintenant, on a commencé avec un fonds, le Fonds Desjardins Environnement, un fonds commun de placement, mais on est rendu maintenant à plus de 6 produits qui, globalement, cumulent, et ça me fait très plaisir de le dire, plus de 1,4 milliard de dollars de l'avoir de nos membres. Alors, c'est de l'avoir des clients qui ont décidé d'opter pour une solution qui intègre les critères environnementaux, sociaux et de gouvernance. Alors, notre approche en investissement socialement responsable, en quelques secondes, ça consiste en plusieurs stratégies. Un petit peu de travail qui est fait au niveau de la sélection, un peu, quand même, pas mal de travail au niveau de la sélection, mais ce n'est pas là où on a le plus d'impact. C'est beaucoup du travail en matière de dialogue avec les entreprises. Donc, ce qu'on dit, c'est qu'on peut faire de l'investissement socialement responsable en incitant les entreprises à changer, à améliorer pour venir réduire les impacts néfastes, les impacts environnementaux, les impacts sociaux qu'elles peuvent avoir. Et ce, dans tous les secteurs. Et là, je précise, for Cameron, in all sectors, except nuclear, tobacco, weapons. So yes, we invest in oil and gas and mining and all of these bad companies because we believe we can influence them towards change. C'est la stratégie. Well, the shareholder engagement is the strategy we focus more on because we'd like to do impact investing and we will do it, I think, one day, but soon. But right now, we need this. Impact investing needs a lot more research in order to be able to develop the product that will be accessible to you and will be appealing also. Because, you know, we're talking about investment, we're not talking about donations. So we want returns. We can argue on the level of returns we want, but we want returns. In just a challenge for all of you, for all of us, we're at 1.4 billions. And today, in all of Canada, simply in mutual funds, we have reached, actually last month, $1 trillion. And we are at Desjardins one of the leaders. In overall Canada, in the mutual fund business, I'd say if I stretch it a lot, 2% of all the mutual fund money is invested in SRI product. So there's a lot of room to grow. Oh, that's it, I'm done.
So thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to come and be part of the panel this afternoon. Apologies that I'll be just addressing our conference here today in English, but my own work is broadly in responsible investing, so bringing environmental, social, and governance factors into investment decision making. And this is a very large umbrella that responsible investing covers. And within that umbrella, we find socially responsible investing and we find impact investing. Each of these has been defined. So there are a number, as we go through the discussion today, we're going to see some intertwining of these themes where the investor is often seeking to have the positive impact in the social or environmental, or in some cases seeking to do the least bad by an approach that's called best of sector, so how to look at a sector and invest in a company that's got the highest standards, or as Rosalie mentioned, to engage with companies to raise their environmental, social, and governance standards. So we see a number of strategies and a number of themes that is under this umbrella. my own work that was mentioned by Kareem, we're a large initiative on responsible investing, and we actually have 34 partners as of the last month, because UCAM has come in as a partner in that work on responsible investing. And this research is really looking at all of these areas that I've just identified, and looking in particular at what's often called the business case. Why should investors look at this type of investing? And then, you know, the governance structures, the regulatory frameworks. And we have a particular focus on the extractive sector because investors, particularly Canadian investors, play quite a key role vis-a-vis the extractive sector. Many people are not aware that the majority of mining companies are actually headquartered here in Canada, and it allows Canadian investors to have quite a bit of influence within the extractive sector. Though, as Rosalie has said, it doesn't mean that the extractive sector goes away, and this could be an interesting debate as we go forward this afternoon. So, and then the last area, of course, is in this area that Kareem has focused on in impact, choosing those environmental and social projects for investment that are going to have those results. Now, Carleton University isn't the only university, because Ottawa U has also taken steps in this area. And as mentioned, Professor George Brown, he's over at the law school and providing a course on community and community investment so that you can take a look at that. And in addition, your pension and endowment has signed the Principles for Responsible Investment and is actually one of the first universities in the world to sign. My own university, Carleton, they said that they endorsed the principles but weren't ready to become a signatory as of yet. And when Ottawa U signed on, many of my colleagues from around the world sent me notes of congratulation that my university had become a signatory, but in actual fact it was Ottawa U. And becoming a signatory to those principles actually creates an area of leverage for those who want to see their pension and endowment used in a more positive way. And I know when we get into the panel discussion, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So thank you, for Penelope.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Nancy. Yeah. If you can wrestle the microphone off.
So I think I'm going to bring a little bit different perspective, a little bit more of a pragmatic perspective. I work for Export Development Canada, and we are a Crown corporation, which means that we operate in an arm's length from government, and we turn a profit for the government. We pay a dividend to Canada, and what we do is we operate in the space where we provide financial products to companies doing business internationally. And so what that means is that we provide loans or insurance to companies that want to do business outside of Canada. I'll bring the international dimension as well, because we've issued a green bond. We talk to investors internationally. We understand where they're at in terms of socially responsible investing as a whole, where it's going growth-wise. And to the points made previously, it's definitely a growth area. Endowment funds are definitely at the forefront. And so I can explain to you the process by which we undertook to issue a bond, and sort of details around that, and happy to answer questions in due course. Thank you.
Thanks. I think it's fitting that I'm sitting on the far left, given the approach that I take to a lot of this work. So my name's Cameron Fenton. I work nationally to coordinate a campaign called Fossil Free Canada, which right now means that I work with 40, just about 40 at this point in time, campus-based groups working on campaigns to divest their university from fossil fuels, as well as about a dozen and rising off-campus campaigns. And I think to understand the frame or like the approach that we take to this, it's important to talk about something that actually happened this week. And it's on Monday, 2 reports came out. The first report was from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it's very long, very, very in-depth, and in the shortest way I can say it, it basically says that climate change is here, we're causing it by burning fossil fuels, it's really bad and gonna get a whole lot worse, and the only way we have a chance of heading it off and maintaining a safe planet to live on is to leave 80% of our globally known fossil fuel reserves underground. The second report was a report from ExxonMobil. And this report was that ExxonMobil was going to disclose its carbon risk. Basically, how exposed Exxon considered it was to this thing called the carbon bubble, which I think we'll probably get into a bit more as we go forward. And Exxon's report on Monday that was what they thought their risk was, and I quote, was, they said that based on our analysis, none of our hydrocarbon reserves are now or will ever become stranded. And they made sure to add, and we're going to keep looking for more of them. So the best scientific minds on climate change and energy on our planet are saying we have to stop burning these things and leave the majority of them underground. The biggest fossil fuel company on our planet is saying we're going to burn everything we've got and find more. So we're faced with a choice. Neither of these reports are lying. Neither of them are making up facts. They're representing 2 very different ideas. One of them is that we will have a safe planet to live on. The other one is that some guys will get very, very rich. And I think that this gets to the core of what, like, the flaws when we talk about divestment around fossil fuels versus shareholder engagement. Now, I'm not of the opinion that we throw out all ideas of shareholder engagement or active ownership. I think there are situations where they work. They work in situations where there is a flaw in a company's business model or an industry's business model. With the fossil fuel company, it is not simply a small flaw. It is not that we want them to stop using a certain type of labor to produce their product. It's not like Apple. If we want them to stop producing iPhones somewhere with poor labor practices, we could run that and we could engage with them and we could change that. It is that the model of the fossil fuel industry, their business model, is the flaw. It is that they plan to burn 5 times the amount of fossil fuels our planet can sustain for us to continue living on it. And so in that, and considering that, shareholder engagement and engaging with these companies will not work. They will not willingly choose to leave money on the table, and a lot of money. And so when we talk about this, I think when we talk about divestment, I think it's important to understand that we're facing a choice. And the choice is between, do we allow this to go forward, continuing to follow a path that cannot win, or do we figure out other ways to engage with this to build the social and political pressure? And one of those avenues, with the fossil fuel industry, with climate change, and with such an environmental crisis, is divestment.
Thank you, Cameron. I like that you're on the far left. It makes me feel a little more comfortable to be sitting here. So thank you very much, all of you, for explaining a little bit about who you are and what you do, and what your positions are. And we have a series of questions. I'm not going to stick to them religiously, but they're a good outline for, I think you've all seen what they are. But I wanted to first start and ask you, Tessa, if you can explain to us, and you talked a little bit about the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, but perhaps you could explain to us the difference between those principles and the kind of idea of SRI, just socially responsible investment in the investment sector.
The principles for responsible investment are six principles, and they are extremely broad. So they basically, the investor is pledging to bring environmental, social, and governance factors into their investment decision making, and to integrate that across their portfolio, and to influence the financial industry itself to take those into consideration. They also pledge to report on their annual report annually on their progress. And these set of principles were designed to be really broad and not to be too prescriptive, because the objective was to bring as many investors onto as signatories of that set of principles as possible. And in order to do that, they needed the principles to be very broad. the success has been that the signatories to that set of principles represents $32 trillion of assets under management around the world. And there's approximately $90 trillion of assets. So this is over a third of all of the financial assets have now pledged to take these items into consideration. But the difficulty is that when you develop a set of principles that's designed to be broad and all-encompassing, you are moving a set of ideas much more toward the mainstream. And part of that movement toward the mainstream creates some conflict around how much this is going to advance the area of having these kinds of impacts through the investment portfolio. Because you can see that as you go to the mainstream, that more of the radical ideas are dropped away. Now this is, I'm kind of raising that around the principles for responsible investing, that I see some great success in mainstreaming the idea of ESG integration, but that I see also that it moves the if you will, the movement around these kinds of activities to become less radical. And what I see often is within this movement, it's much more now, as it goes mainstream, it's more in protecting and preserving the status quo than in becoming an agent provocateur, or somebody that sits at the outside edge and fights vigorously to disturb the status quo. And I've just got a book coming out myself, an edited volume called SRI in the 21st Century, Does It Make a Difference to Society? Because we wanted to ask that question around, and in particular, we use the term SRI, so socially responsible investing, deliberately, because we know that responsible investing in its current frame is very broad. And SRI, the way I define it, you know, you've got to love all the academics. We always have to start with our definitions and our assumptions. But what I use as my definition is that while RI is the integration of environmental, social, and governance factors, that SRI also includes an ethical component. And the ethical component is the values-based component that each of us holds in the center of our beings that drives our values. And this ethical component is reflected in SRI. It allows individuals to make their choice about SRI investments, and it's often reflected in codes of behavior and norms that we start to see adopted. So it's not that we live in a world devoid of ethics. It's just that ethics can often be a more contested terrain, and where each of us holds different values and principles to be true.
Thank you. And I know, Rosalie, you wanted to, let me just add something to the question, because I know you want to follow on from this. Can you talk about as well, when you want to, I know you want to piggyback on what Tessa said, but can you also talk about as well, I just have a quote here, is that the Canadian stock exchanges are the world's largest source of equity capital for mining companies undertaking exploration and development. And you said earlier that you, in your SRI funds, you invest in extractive companies. Can you talk about how you think you're actually changing their behavior through this SRI funding?
Yeah, okay. So first to a point of clarification, all of what Tessa said about the PRI is true. Just wanted to point that out, that even though it's broad, the reporting and assessment, so the yearly activity where you report back on your progress, I wish you had the time to go through the survey with me, because we had, I think, 85 indicators. It took hours. And the good thing for all of us is that this questionnaire, the survey we had to fill out, I'd say half of the questions or half of the indicators are going to be released publicly. So because we're in a university, I would encourage the professors and the students to maybe start looking at this disclosure as a research topic, because there's going to be a lot of information. The format might not be nice, but there's going to be a lot of information. So I think we have a fair chance with this reporting and assessment framework at setting new standards. I'm not going to, you should not repeat standards. They're not going to like that. Not at all. But it is probably going to become, or it has a fair chance of becoming, the only international reference. Maybe I'm wrong, but in my mind, it's going to be probably the only international reference in terms of responsible investing. So it's mainstream, but it's going to open the door for the rest, because in the room there are those of us who are, you know, maybe wanting more than just the mainstream. We're just in the room, just hiding sometimes under the mainstream umbrella. So to go back to your question on extractive sector, because our product are investing in, I shouldn't say all our product. I mean, we have one Prioterra portfolio. We decided not to have any oil sands, no oil, no energy, no gas, no mining, to be able to at least meet the demand of a growing part of the clients. But for the majority of our product, yes, we are invested in the mining sector. In the Toronto Stock Exchange, the mining sector, it has decreased a little bit, but it still represents at least 14%. So it's a very big sector. And so we believe that it's important to engage some of those mining companies into shareholder engagement in order to make them progress. So we'll be selective. The first thing that we want to avoid, it's pointless to try to engage in a conversation with a mining company that has not defined some environmental and social objectives and has not put in place any mechanism. It's pointless. They're not going to listen to us. And so we avoid those companies. We don't invest in them. But the ones who do, and we hope that just by the fact that we invest in them, it's a little bit rewarding, it's a little tap on the shoulder, and then we engage in a conversation with some of them. For the mining sector, we haven't had a lot, I shouldn't say that. With our partner, NEI, we did engage with Barrick Gold for a long time.
You did or you didn't?
We did. NEI did engage. We have products with NEI. So the increased diversity in the boardroom of Barrick Gold is a direct result of a suggestion by NEI. So, and NEI wants to pursue the conversation with Barrick Gold. A lot of the progress in the Guatemala mines, the Marlin mines, was what Goldcorp, yeah.
Telfer School of Business.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It's a direct. I mean, NEI was involved, went to the mine for many times, and did request a human rights impact assessment.
Yes.
Yes.
But that was quite controversial.
I know.
Yes.
I know.
Okay.
I know. Unfortunately, it's not perfect.
No.
But it is. It gives you some examples of the things we do and the topics we engage with the mining. So currently, one of our biggest shareholder engagement is with First Quantum Minerals. I'm not disclosing any confidential information. We disclose it to our client and we disclose it publicly. And so with First Quantum Mineral, we're starting to engage in the conversation. So we'll be following different topics. Panama will be one of them.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, I'm going to move on. A question for Nancy and Graham. I want you to, Cameron, sorry, to respond if you can. So I'd like, Nancy, if you could explain a little bit about the green bonds and what it means in terms of EDC's investments. Now, to my knowledge, EDC invests in terms of providing support for extractive companies operating overseas, and there have been some controversial investments in that case. So perhaps you could explain how the green bond works in relation to those investments, and then I'll ask Cameron to comment.
Yeah, so the way it works at EDC is we often make loans to companies that are doing business internationally. Some of those are for the mines, but we also have a lot of business with clean tech. And clean tech has been historically a domestically focused industry, but it's becoming more internationally focused and it's showing great growth potential. So what we did at EDC is we looked at our total loan portfolio and we decided that we were going to pick out a group of loans that were in support of businesses that were deemed to be beneficial to the environment. And this would be specifically in the area of preservation, protection, or remediation in the area of air, water, or soil, and anything that was doing efforts towards mitigating climate change. And so within that pool of loans, we had a lot of water and wastewater, biofuel, and waste-to-energy type projects, so smaller type projects. And then what we did as well is we worked with the University of Oslo. They have a center there called Cicero, which is the Center for International Climate and Environmental Research, and we developed, a framework by which we would choose these various different transactions to be included for our green bond. And we showed it to our framework to the university, as have other supranationals like the World Bank and International Finance Corporation, and we received an endorsement that they felt that our approach was the right one. And so on that basis, we identified a pool of loans, and then what we did was we were able to issue a green bond in support of some of those transactions. And I have a sample of some of these types of transactions. And they are, for example, a company in Argentina, and they were looking to expand a manufacturing capacity of wind power generation, and as well their investment portfolio of wind power plants. In another case, we have a loan to a company in Costa Rica to help upgrade an engineered domestic landfill site that was outdated, frankly, and so they wanted to upgrade that to meet international best practices. So, like I said, clean tech is a strategic priority for EDC. It shows a lot of potential, and so we're moving very slowly into the green bond space. In a given year in Treasury, we would raise upwards of $12 billion to support companies doing business abroad, and our green bond was $300 million. So it's a very small and conservative, we're a very conservative organization. We have a large corporate social responsibility department. We take a very conservative approach to this. It's an industry that it's in its infancy, and so what we want to do is we want to move very slowly and very carefully into this space so that it is a good thing for all concerned parties.
Thank you. Cameron, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. After spending 3 years working in international UN climate talks, I never thought I would come into learning new acronyms until I ended up working on investment and divestment work. But so coming into this, talking about and basically I had to learn about the EDC green bonds. And I think when we talk about reinvestment on the side of divestment campaigns, and especially at the campus and community level, we're really looking at questioning and then trying to build things that reinvest locally in communities and are looking at this sort of as a localized scale. And we think about this, and I think this is the challenge we have, because fundamentally, the way our energy system is currently structured, it cannot simply be shifted. We cannot simply replace a coal-fired power plant with wind turbines and solar panels, because they produce energy in a very different way. And the way that our society has grown to develop and use energy has been to build large fossil fuel-driven, primarily energy generation systems, primarily coal-fired power plants, in the sort of hinterlands, usually in communities of color and frontline communities in Canada and Indigenous communities, and that we produce all the electricity for a city or even an entire region through these small number of plants. And so that cannot be transitioned. And so when we think about things like green bonds, we try and challenge the idea and we challenge reinvestment into looking at how we can actually drive reinvestment into actually making sustainable communities, or trying to take, through reinvestment, campuses off the grid, and trying to think about how we can do that on that side. Because to put it into a story, a friend of mine, Tim DeChristopher, told me this, and we were talking about how we actually produce power and the challenge of getting off fossil fuels. And the way he said to me is, so how do we produce most of our electricity today? Coal. Now, think about this. Think about, could you actually go out, buy a small miniature coal-fired power plant, install it on the side of your house, then go into the middle of town, chip away at the old coal block, get yourself a sack of coal, come back to your house, put that bag of coal into your tiny coal-fired power plant attached to your house, and produce all your electricity? And I was like, no, that's ridiculous. But that's exactly what renewable energy has to be able to do. We have to be able to power things on a small scale, by house, by block, by community, by city. And so it requires a changing of the thinking of the way we invest in it, not just the way we build it. And so I think when we get down to talking about green bonds, a lot of the things that we're really inspired by and thinking about, and I think it's great that they're starting to exist and especially getting into the mainstream in a lot of different ways. But the challenge is, how do we reinvest in localized things? I think there's some interesting things, reading recently about the Toronto Zoo Gas project of a localized biogas project that's currently now been issuing a green bond at a very small scale. And I think things like this are really interesting because they not only challenge the idea of how do we get out of investing in fossil fuels, but they challenge this idea of how do we reinvest in our communities and build up power for ourselves and challenge the kind of control that the fossil fuel industry has, because that's really the only way we're going to be able to solve this problem. And not only will it address things like climate change, we're actually going to be building a more equitable energy system.
Thank you very much. So the next question, I guess, a lot of people might be wondering how SRI works. So how do you screen? How do you do this? So I wanted to start with Rosalie to see if you could explain that to us a little bit about what kind of, because you're not required by law to, there are no kind of legal guidelines in terms of socially responsible investment. And in fact, as far as I know, the only thing that exists in some jurisdictions is the ability for pension funds and other institutional investors to socially or invest responsibly. You're given leeway as long as you report that you do it.
Well, in terms of legal or regulatory environment, especially for the pension fund, the main obstacle that was in the room many years ago was the so-called fiduciary duty. Yeah. And so a bunch of reports were issued since then, done by prominent legal firms around the world, that it came to the conclusion that for pension fund, it was okay to look at environmental, social issues and governance issue, because if it meant to broaden the risks perspective, then it meant also that it was a good conception of the fiduciary duty. So I'm getting the, okay, I'm not making any mistakes. Good. So I'm not an academic, but I do have definitions and concept as well. I don't think that we have my slide up there, but anyway, our definition of socially responsible investment is the following. So it's integrating environmental, social, and governance criteria into the selection and management of investments. So selection and management means that you can intervene at different times. So either before you buy a stock, or after, or there's a multitude of combinations. So I tried, because we're in university, I tried to conceptualize all the possibilities that are out there. So on the screen, you see that at the very top, the triangles, those are the environmental, social, and governance informations that are feeding the system. The center, the sort of black box, when you're looking at portfolio managers, when they decide on which companies they want to invest in or not, the very basic is to possess the information on environmental, social, and governance issue. Not only we need to understand the climate change issue from a worldwide perspective, but we need to understand what climate change means for companies in Canada, or we need to understand it by sector. So what does it mean for a specific sector? Once we have this information, then we're able to distinguish how does this impact company A versus company B, which one is more exposed, which one is less exposed. And when we know that, we're able to sort of form a judgment on, does company A does what it should be doing to address those issues or not, versus company B. Having said that, there's still a lot of possibility, because that's just the beginning. So in my conception of socially responsible investment, there are 6 other mechanisms that we can use. So you can screen for based on convictions and values. That's how you see screens applied for tobacco, weapons, nuclear. But you can also screen based on international norms. So pension fund will go and screen out companies who have activities that are not legal according to the international community. The only 2 that we know right now is landmines and cluster bombs. Canada has ratified a treaty along with hundreds of countries, and so therefore those specific weapons are banned, and pension funds do now do conceptualize that they can divest from them. That's almost the only way you'll be able to get the divestment from pension fund for now, at least. You can have the best of sector approach. You can have the shareholder engagement approach, and then the two topics that are, to me, the impact investing and the future are the financial or microcredit, so financial impact investing, and the green clean tech thematic funds. And in those two areas, we don't have a lot of possibilities for investment yet. There's some research that needs to be done, more research, because no one wants to experience with this savings. Unless you do, I mean, you raise your hands if you want to try out and put all your savings at risk in a product that we will test. I don't think that you want that, so we have to do more research.
Do we have to put all of our savings, or could we just put a little bit of our savings?
We could put a little bit.
Okay.
We could try with little bits.
There, baby steps.
Okay, good.
Kareem, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? And I just want to add that Canada has also ratified a wide range of international human rights treaties, and yet there are, reports that come out that say that our companies have been involved in different places in violations or complicit in violations of human rights. So maybe, do you want to try and address
just a quick thing. So, I mean, I agree with everything Rosalie said. And, one of the things maybe for a lot of you, how many people have heard of Kickstarter here? All right. So right now, what are you buying when you buy something in Kickstarter? You're not yet buying a piece of the company, but you're helping to validate part of their business model or their product, right? At some point, you'll be able to buy part of their company, right? At some point, you'll be able to have a more direct link in terms of telling them the kind of product you want. And so, again, this is a natural evolution as we talk about finance and some of the larger institutional investors. Part of what we're all trying to get at is what's the link between what we really care about and the impact our dollar can have in that decision. Right now, if every person in the room gave $5 on Kickstarter for a certain kind of product, there's a good chance that we could build that product or someone would actually want to build it. It's a similar argument on the pension fund side. These little steps that we're taking around starting a conversation, divestment, et cetera, it's just that different players can have that conversation at a different level. But I think that one thing to keep in mind maybe for some of this conversation, if you're thinking, well, that's maybe a couple of steps away from where I am today. Well, think about Kickstarter, think about Kiva. There's a ton of Canadian organizations where actually the distance between your dollar and the impact you want to see is quite short. The distance between your impact and the dollar that you're paying in your university tuition is a little bit longer. So maybe that could be a helpful way to conceptualize how you can begin to make change more immediately, but also what the longer term kind of implications of these kinds of conversations are, because they're equally important if you want to move big sums of capital, but there's also a very active way of moving little sums today.
Thank you very much. Okay, I've got two more questions I want to throw out at the panel. The first one is, institutional investors are businesses too. They are for-profit business. So what happens when you knock up against, socially responsible investing and knocks up against profit, when there's a conflict between that? What happens? Tessa, did you want to?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I think Rosalie's already talked a little bit about this, because what we often find within this for the investors is that they are prepared to make investments in SRI, and they say, if they're asked, do you want to have this kind of positive impact, they agree that they do. But then when they're asked, what about the financial return, in many cases they answer, as long as it doesn't impact the financial return. We'd like to, in other words, we'd like to have both. We want to have the positive impacts, but we also want to have the financial return. And, in cases where it's people's pension funds, you can understand, we've just gone through a large period of time where many pension funds in Canada were had heavy liabilities and were underfunded. And those pension funds in many cases made money last year and now are back in a positive funding capability for the future. So in the ideal scenario, and the one that academics are often asked to prove, you know, is can you show me that we could have, you know, make these changes, integrate ESG, and have a positive and even maybe better than benchmark financial performance, because we really want to have our cake and eat it too. I talked a little. I've written a little bit about this problem of that's embedded in responsible investing, which I call the promise of costless change. In other words, and we know that many of the slogans around SRI have been, you know, you can do good and do well at the same time. And it speaks to a little bit of the challenge that Cameron's bringing forward. Can you do well and do good? You can in many ways, but in some of these big fundamental shifts, for example, if we were to divest from fossil fuels, I think there is absolutely no question that the portfolios that would be divesting from fossil fuels today, their financial performance would go down in the short term.
Actually, we tested that.
Ah, good.
10 years of track record, you lose 50% of your financial return.
Yeah. And so a lot of people, especially if they're saving for their retirement and their pension, are not prepared to take that step. They would have to wait out 20 years or 30 years.
Well, it's a
question. They might not be on the planet.
But it's a question that each investor, each one of us, can try to answer. So let's say we backtest 10 years ago, and we flush out all the fossil fuel, just the energy sector, and we earn 50% less. It means that we need to work more in order to retire. So are we prepared to do that? That's a question for all of us, because the fact that the way you frame the question, it creates a dilemma. It's either I do good for the environment or I make money. It's possible, I'm sure it's possible to do both, just like Tessa was saying. So, but it's a matter of how can we do it? It's how can we use that activity that we want to generate profit? Because unless you don't want financial products that are giving a financial return, then you know it's the business. It's what pension funds do. They need financial return in order for us to be able to retire and still have funds.
Yes, it's hard for me to think of pension funds as for-profit corporations, even though they're seeking to make a return on their investment. But the return on the investment is for the beneficiaries, which are you and I, right? You know, one of the things that wasn't well understood and speaks to some of the conflict and the dilemma that's in this, that's all wrapped up in these questions, because when BP was spilling oil into the Gulf of Mexico, which we were all absolutely appalled by, and you may remember in the first week or so, Obama kept talking about the shareholders, and he was kind of painting a picture of the little monopoly man that was somehow, you know, completely liable in that situation. But in most of the shareholders were our pension funds, and it turned out in the UK, 1 out of every $7 generated for pensioners and pension funds in the UK was coming from BP. So there's this direct link, as Rosalie was saying, between our retirement savings and those investments today. So how do we square this?
Okay, I think Karim wanted to say something, and then Cameron.
Yeah, just well, I think generally I would agree with these points. I'm probably less averse to the myth of this trade-off that it applies to every situation. So I don't believe necessarily that it's blanket, though. I mean, a lot of the data we have so far may suggest that. I'm more excited by new kinds of business models where, actually in order for them to be successful, they're actually better for the world. I mean, Zipcar, most of you have heard of Zipcar. One of the metrics of their success that they talk about is for every car that they have, they take 15 cars off of the road. And that means that, maybe on average 15 people decide to change their behavior, like me, who decide to give up their car. Now, for me, that's really interesting in that the more that more zip cars are available, so the more that people use zip cars, the more zip cars are available, and then there's almost a bit of a network effect, right? You feel that, well, the nearest car is maybe 10 minutes away, so you're not going to get it today, but if it was 2 minutes away, you might be tempted. And so if they say for every person or every car, they're taking 15 cars off the road, I think that's a really interesting metric of success. Now, is their bottom line just about how many cars they take off the road? No, it's still about how much money they make. But the fact that they're reporting on all these things is interesting because their environmental impact is going to trend in a positive direction as they become more successful. That's where I think the myth of this trade-off begins to break down over time. In the short term, probably we have more of a trade-off.
Thank you. Cameron?
Yeah, I think that on the basic level, or at a fundamental level, one piece of it is understanding that, especially when we're talking about fossil fuels, we're not talking about giving up money. By staying invested in them, we're talking about taking on risk. The carbon bubble is not a theoretical thing into the future. We're already seeing it. Coal stocks are already being downgraded. Goldman Sachs recently pulled out of a massive coal export terminal being built on the Pacific coast. The United States government has announced they will no longer be investing in new coal-fired power plants, followed quickly by the World Bank and a number of other international financiers. We're starting to see this come together, and I think that I could bring it back to what I talked about with Exxon at the very beginning. When Exxon said, we don't think that we'll ever have to strand any of our assets, or we don't think that we'll have to restrict it. And it makes sense for them to say that. ExxonMobil with Koch Industries have been the two largest funders of climate denial on the planet. They have bankrolled an industry that has made sure in the past that climate action has not happened. Now we know that. Now we know we can get them out of it. And so when we talk about the carbon bubble, we're talking about companies, these fossil fuel companies, that could lose 40 to 60% of their market value very quickly. And these isn't numbers coming from activist organizations. This is HSBC, this is Standard & Poor, this is the World Bank, the International Energy Agency, London School of Economics, Citibank, constantly coming back and saying it. And part of this is just this general trend that we're starting to see towards renewable energy. Renewable energy is getting cheaper. More and more companies and people are taking it on. But what we're also seeing is that social change is rising. The climate movement is building. Resistance to fossil fuels and to the continued growth is building, in part because our planet is becoming more and more difficult to live on. Possibly one of the best mobilizing forces for climate change in the United States was Hurricane Sandy hitting New York. The reality is that we are living the era of climate change, and as worse it gets, the more resistance will happen. We also currently are living in an era that could probably be defined as a modern era of revolution. The speed at which modern resistance movements take very, very quickly and grow is like nothing we've ever seen before. In the last few years, we've seen the Occupy movement. We've seen the Arab Spring. We've seen the Quebec student strike. We've seen even over the last 2 years, Syria, the Ukraine. We have seen massive revolutionary movements pop up. Have they happened around fossil fuels, energy, and climate yet? No. Could they? Probably. Will they if it keeps getting worse? Very likely. Because the same corporations that are responsible for climate change are very closely tied to the economic inequality that sparked Occupy. So these sorts of things can happen. And it's important to think about that because social change is not linear. And so we can say, like, well, as we are right now, carbon will not be restricted, therefore we will not have to deal with this. Therefore we can continue to burn it. But social change doesn't go like that. It's not a straight line. I'm, I think through my comments, clearly not an economist, I'm an organizer. I studied political organizing and history of social movements, and social movements tend to go like this. Boom. And once they go, it's those folks who have not been ready for it, they're going to face the impacts. And when we think about that, when you think about it, totally taking it out of the social change aspect, think about folks who weren't ready for the housing bubble. And just at a university context, the University of Toronto had to underwrite their endowment by $500 million because they were not prepared for the housing bubble. So when we think about this and think about these things together, we have a carbon bubble, we have growing social unrest and growing momentum to fight back on climate change and to pass legislation at the political level, and from a groundswell of momentum, the fact that we have 40 university campaigns working on divestment is a testament to that. This will happen. And the question right now is, do we hold on to these risky, dangerous investments, or do we get out? And from what we know, getting out isn't hurting investments. The schools that have divested so far, not only are their investments doing fine, they're getting more donations for taking a stand. They're making more money because of it. What we've heard is that divesting may add 0.01% risk to your portfolio. And so it's not a huge risk now, but staying involved and not thinking about how do we get out of this, how do we avoid this carbon bubble, is a bigger economic risk than anything now. And then add on to that carbon bubble risk the cost that adapting to climate change will have, $1 trillion just in Canada to deal with sea level rise by 2020. That adds on more and more and more financial risk. And so as we level and add all of this up, it's a question of, do we do it now, or do we face a bigger financial hit later? And I think, to be as cliche as I possibly can, I'm going to quote Nelson Mandela, in that it always seems impossible until it's done. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the question we face now. How do we get it done?
Thank you, Cameron. Nancy, did you have something that you wanted to say? I'd like to get your thoughts on this.
I'm the simple soldier on this panel. When we issued our bond, it's just an interesting point, and I think it's a practical point to the concept you described. You know, we sell a bond, it's at a level, and basically it's at the same level that we would issue other bonds. And so it becomes a bit of a no-brainer for the institutional investors who are buying this thing. I can buy bond X at value Y, or I can buy this green bond at the same price. It's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't I buy this? Because of the intrinsic value that exists within it. And it's incumbent on organizations like ours, public sector institutions, to direct the capital flow in the right direction. We bear the cost, legal fees and so on and so forth, but that's our role in society, because we believe in the future of this. And an interesting anecdote, when we did issue the bond, BlackRock was one of the investors. BlackRock internationally, one of the most sophisticated, you know, a bit of a Darth Vader kind of character, because it's pretty astute. They completely underestimated the amount of calls that they had from constituents saying, it's about time you have products of this nature, and you better get more because we want better choice, and if we don't have better choice, we're going somewhere else. So now they're scrambling to get issuers to issue more of this type of stuff, because they just don't have the supply to meet the demand. So it's just a pragmatic answer to your question.
Thank you very much. Now, I got two different things. I got a 5-minute and a 10-minute. So do we still have time for one more question, or do we have time for one more? Okay, my last question. Should public institutions like the University of Ottawa be required to invest in socially responsible companies? I'll just point out, as many of us know, there are mining companies who support the University of Ottawa. We have an organization that is hosted here called the Devonshire Initiative that has members, or participants, they're not members, who are some of the major mining companies in Canada. So what is our responsibility as a university? Should universities be required to invest as the public institutions in socially responsible investments? And I'm going to throw that out, and whoever wants to take up the microphone first.
Do you expect a no from us? It's going to be a yes for sure.
Okay, great. It's a question, okay.
Oh no, it's a definite yes. I'm in socially responsible investment full time, and I do agree that all institutional investors should develop a socially responsible investment policy. And if it can help, two of our Quebec University are UNPRI signatories, and I know of two others who are not PRI signatories, but who have started to integrate social responsible investing. So other universities are doing it. So it's feasible.
It's feasible. Do you think it should be legally required?
I think it should be legally required to disclose how you handle environmental, social, and governance issue at your pension fund.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think it needs to be. I think it'll evolve in that direction naturally, and some of the university endowment funds that have the better performing records, Harvard is one, there's a whole host of others, and they've recently, there's been a fellow who is the chief investment officer of PIMCO, one of the largest bond funds internationally, who has just quit. Bill Gross's, mecca for for bonds, and he's going to be running the Harvard Endowment Fund. I mean, they're doing it on their own. They don't have to be legislated to do it. They're public sector institutions. They're folks that are at the forefront of thinking. It's going to come naturally. And I think, you know, legislation would sort of lag the movement.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody, Karim? And then, sorry,
So,
Tessa?
I mean, I think legislation can help. It's not necessarily going to be, it's not going to solve a problem. It'll create a set of other issues. But I think in terms of reporting, certainly we can elevate the level to which reporting is done and create some type of clarity around how to interpret what is being reported. Because for the average person, you know, you can't really have a conversation about an annual report or even any kind of reporting that an endowment might do. So I'd love that conversation around reporting to be accessible to all of us. Mm-hmm. So that would be maybe perhaps an area where government legislation could provide some clarity without really making it more difficult for all of us, because we've seen that too.
Okay. Tessa?
I think, you know, an absolute yes in terms of having an SRI or RI policy at the universities. But I would also add that I would like to see a policy for some investment directly in the communities in which the universities are situated. And you know, dare I say it, if I'm putting my wish list together, I'd also like to see a procurement policy at universities and hospitals and other public institutions that would have a really, you know, when we're talking about making this shift to looking at our communities and our ability to invest in our communities, that would be a very, very positive step, because we want them to have a broad responsible investing policy, but these institutions are also in the position of being able to galvanize social enterprises in their region and their local communities, and to be able to have some of their food catered, some of their other services coming directly from community. And I am seeing some of these advancements in the United States. So many universities there are realizing that this is a key role for them. And then maybe I could add affordable housing into the mix too. Yes, okay. I want it all.
Cameron.
I think it would be great, but I think that, first of all, we need governments that actually pass socially or environmentally responsible laws.
Okay. I mean, you could have a rule, like some of the stock exchange rules where it's a comply or explain. So if you don't comply, you just have to explain yourself. That might get around this sort of mandatoriness of the rule. So it falls to me then to wrap up the session and to call on Philippe and Anaïs. I think you... Oh, no, we're sorry. We're having questions and answers. Goodness, it's been a long day. So we're going to turn the floor over to you for your questions. And I think what we'll do is we'll take 2 questions at a time. If you could go to the microphones, please, and identify yourselves. And please, if you could try and keep your questions to questions rather than statements, and keep them as brief as possible. Thank you.
Two, three. Oh, all right. Hey, hi, my name is Mitch. I attended both Carleton and the University of Ottawa, so perhaps I could serve as a bridge for a bit of the friendly competitiveness going on right now. I feel like there's a bit of an elephant in the room, and so I'm hoping that I can parse it out with you right now, and I won't pose a question to any one person. Anyone's free to answer this. This morning in the Globe, they talked about a report that was cited that 86 of the wealthiest Canadians hold as much wealth as the 11 million poorest in Canada. The wealth gap is growing. It's a real problem. What advice would you give to advocates for impact investing to prevent further exacerbating this problem?
Okay, one more question, then we'll go to the panel. So why don't we have...
Actually, it's related. So, but I'm actually an economist, and I actually have 2.5 degrees in economics. So general economics, applied economics, and have my master's in applied environmental studies and local economic development. So I guess I'll try to make it short, but I pride myself in being evidence-based when I look at basically the right and the left. And honestly, what I see over and over again is like blinder type thinking. So on one side, we're talking about profits, but we all know profits are revenues minus expenses, and expenses mean costs. So he's talking about the costs. And I feel like the financial sector is ignoring the cost. And that's really bad economics. So, you know, when you talk about health in general or environmental health, we tend to forget that there's a significant interplay between environmental health and chronic illness. And I'll give you an example. So genetically modified foods, you know, they are bad for the environment, but they're also, you know, unlabeled, right? And so it goes back to the issue with information. And so, you know, if people had information, you wouldn't really need to worry about SRI type policies because a consumer would be able to make an informed choice by virtue of how they choose to treat every dollar they spend. So I mean, like I came to Ottawa because I received funding from the provincial government to launch an economics-based social enterprise, and I call it planethealthfreak.com. And the intention from this platform is to empower consumers to support responsible business. And quite frankly, I feel that that is the only solution to it, because at the end of the day, if people actually just, even if they have to live with more than one person, and even if they have to go with a zip car, I really feel that that's really the way out of it. And it would be excellent if the government can be on board, but at the end of the day, according to the Bank of Canada, and this report was published in 2012, they said that the average Canadian has a ratio of of debt to disposable income of 150%. So the average Canadian needs to make 50% more income in order to live at subsistence levels, and the majority of debt is consumer debt that's hidden in equity, home equity, and so that puts a danger of, you know, mortgages not being paid off, which is, you know, the biggest investment that the average person actually puts out. So I really feel like that the issue is about how do we redefine the indicators by which we measure progress in our society, and profit is the starting point. And so if we can incorporate actual cost, opportunity cost, which is basic classical economics, I think it would be a lot easier. And I feel that the majority of profits that we talk about are overinflated. So I guess my question to you would be, do you see this happening anytime soon in terms of you acknowledging that there's a relationship and that you should take into consideration cost into the profit equation? So.
Okay, it's open to the panel, so whoever grabs their microphone first can answer first.
I think that possibly, and just as in relation to that and answering it, in terms of talking about one of the main things where we talk about the necessity or like why we push divestment so hard, is that the fossil fuel industry in Canada, but around the world even, probably gets away with the single largest non-charged cost. If I were to go outside and throw garbage on the ground and be seen by a police officer, I could get ticketed for littering. An oil refinery can dump as much carbon into the atmosphere as it chooses, as it pleases, in the vast majority of places in Canada and not pay for any of it. So the very idea that this industry is profitable and will remain profitable is based on a flawed assumption that they are allowed to pollute for free. And I think that's one of the things that as we talk about challenging it and building that in and talking about full circle costs is a huge piece that's currently being ignored. And I think as we start to see in legislation and things like that possibly moving forward, but again, that requires political will, which requires people to build it in campaigns and yada, 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 and so forth. But I think that ties into answering Mitch's question around how do we actually address economic inequality. The production and consumption of energy in our world and fossil fuel-based energy has been one of the single largest wealth concentrating forces on the planet in our history. The majority of the biggest corporations on the planet, the wealthiest, most of them produce oil or some fossil fuel derivative. Walmart, maybe not, but a lot of them do. And of the wealthiest, the 5 wealthiest fossil fuel companies on the planet made $140 billion in profits last year. And so I think when we talk about this, one of the fundamental shifts in terms of addressing inequality is democratizing energy. And that's what renewable energy presents, and talking about, as I talked about earlier, this idea of, you know, locally produced, on your home renewable energy. That's the biggest threat to economic inequality, or to at least this sort of like wealth concentration in a small number of hands, because you can't put a tap on the sun. There's no gas pump for wind. It actually has this idea of democratizing the single largest wealth generating force on our planet, which is a huge shift and represents a massive threat, hence why so many corporations have been fighting so hard, funding climate denial and so on and so forth.
Rosalie?
On the first question, I'm not going to be able to address the whole questions of the gap. I can say what we are working on, and I think it's one of the factors that contributes to the gap. So I'm going to talk about executive compensation. You were leading me to that. So executive compensation, we know that a lot of the executive compensations of our Canadian company CEO and American CEO can be sometimes quite large and sometimes not necessarily aligned with the company's performance. So compensation increases, performance was not necessarily good that year, and we're trying to figure out how come, you know, they're having their math wrong. So one of the thing we can do, one of the solution, and we've requested that for a long time, and now we have it for the main companies, is we have the ability right now to express our concerns through the ballot every year at the AGM. It's called a proxy voting. It's an advisory vote, so you can tick, yeah, I agree with your executive compensation package, or no, I don't agree. And, you know, I think lots of the time I see a lot of the people that are getting frustrated at those levels and would like for the executive compensation not to increase that much. Right now, what we're seeing is levels of support for executive compensations in Canada and the States well above 90%. So you got to ask yourself, are you voting when you're invited to the AGM if you're a shareholder? Is your pension fund voting? How do they vote for an executive compensation? So you can ask those questions. What types of proxy voting policy do they have? Because that's one of the mechanisms that we have. And the largest shareholders of companies are pension funds and mutual funds. You can get the information from mutual funds. We're disclosing it publicly. We're forced to do it also. We're pleased to do it, but it's the law. All the mutual funds are forced to disclose how they vote and what's the proxy voting policy. So on the second question, the cost, yes. I believe what we do when we're talking about shareholder engagement is in the room talking about integrating extra financial costs progressively, slowly, because it matters. And we have to be conscious of when we do it, and if it means increased costs, it might mean increased prices for the consumer. So, you know, I don't have to teach you, how it works. It might mean huge impacts for companies. I know it's already expensive. I'm not against that. I'm saying we're doing it.
Right now represents only the people that are, the handful of people that are doing well. So my question was more along the lines of how does the financial sector help government basically when it comes to supporting social enterprise and local development? Because at the end of the day, the reason why we support fossil fuels is because they lobby our government and so they can stay where they are, right? So he's talking about, sustainable alternative energies. They're much smaller. They're about communities and neighborhoods. So you create jobs that way in a more sustainable fashion, right? As opposed to supporting fossil fuels.
I get you. So buy shares of banks and go to their AGM and ask the questions.
You have to afford them first, right?
No. You don't have to afford them. You own probably some part of. If you've worked in your life, there's a pension. Well, CPPIB, they're not going to like me. CPPIB, go ask CPPIB what they think about that.
Does anybody carry on?
On the first one, just around inequality, so it is a problem, it is increasing, I agree with that. I think that's directly why impact investing is so attractive, in that it gets beyond part of this notion of the response to that typically is you kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. So our current capitalist system is not working for most people, so let's just go on the opposite. Impact investing is actually saying, well, it's not necessarily about one or the other. It's about taking the best of both and trying to find a way to reconcile that. It might take a long time, but that's why it is attractive. And so I would say that one very direct way impact investing is addressing that is a lot of the new businesses are actually providing products or services to groups that otherwise wouldn't be able to access them or afford them. And so particularly when we talk about social enterprise and local enterprise, a lot of those are very targeted through a variety of different models, whether you're cross-subsidizing your activity or you're deliberately targeting, let's say, people that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford certain level of or type of food, nutritious food. Can you make it more accessible to them? So I do think in some ways those businesses are directly addressing that. But on the second question, I don't necessarily think it's a issue around cost, though I think things like true cost accounting are important. I think it's more a broader societal question of what we value and how we put a monetized value to that. So what is the value of a healthy person? What's the value of any one of you when you're on your job search? If you were to say, today, you know, it takes you 6 months to get a job. I mean, it's a pretty tough economy. What if you could reduce that by half to make it 3 months? How much is that worth for each one of you? Maybe you could calculate it in terms of wages, etc. But for me, it's not just about costs. It's about how we are defining value as a society and the tools we use to assign you know, a number to that. And so maybe that's another way of trying to get at some of the issues that you're thinking about.
Hi, sorry, I just want to ask you a question right now. We're running out of time, so we just wanted to ask our panelists in the crowd, since there's more questions, if you want to stay longer to actually answer these questions. So just ask everyone. For the crowd? Okay. All right, great.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to the questions in a second. I just wanted to say one thing on that is that, you know, I think you're right, Kareem, that it's what we value, and in some ways it's a shame that we have to monetize or put monetary value on things like the environment and human rights, for example, for them to matter. And that is one of the problems with our focus in society. Okay, I think you were next, so we'll take the two gentlemen first, because I think you were both next in terms of your questions, and then we'll answer them again, and then we'll take the last three people asking questions.
Bonjour. Hello, my name is Simon Bergeron. I'm a student in international management. Before I begin the question, I've made it short. I've written it down for you guys. I'd like to thank Nancy Kite for attending. I really respect EDC's work on the international scale as a student who does this, and thank you, all of you, for coming, and it was a very interesting debate. On to the question. My question is, we've been discussing social responsibility, socially responsible investment as a choice of business, that they can choose to not invest or invest in social responsible projects. I'd like to hear your opinions on another idea. The social responsibility is that socially responsible investment is actually a cause, an effect of large businesses, that on the long term, companies are beneficial to society, and social responsibility is in fact necessary as a company grows, as it takes on and accrues more power. In a very theoretical sense, it requires to have this social responsibility. I believe the problem is actually seeking short-term goals over these long-term goals that are beneficial to society. What if investors, instead of trying to invest uniquely in companies that are socially responsible now, you instead divest from companies seeking these short-term profits that are negative for society? Wouldn't this make socially responsible investment more attractive and to investors, as well as more profitable? Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more question, and then we'll turn to the panel.
Yeah, hi, my name's Alexi. I really appreciate all of you coming by. And I mean, there's this huge debate. I mean, we're dealing with values, ethics, whatever. There's all this, it's very, very subjective, right? It's very, very subjective. So the point I'm trying to get to is that businesses themselves are typically amoral, okay? As Milton Friedman once stated, I mean, we look at innovations throughout time. We look at the computer, for example. At the time when the computer was built, we didn't really have any idea of what the ramifications were going to be. We look at the overall societal benefit that the computer actually provided, and we see, wow, you know what? If we didn't have the computer today, we would be nowhere, right? But then we look back and we say, well, you know what? There's child labor. There's those toxic minerals coming into the ground. So what are we going to do? I mean, is pursuing this goal of social responsible investing going to hinder innovation? I mean, let's take another example. I mean, we got so many. We got the computer. We got the phone. The cell phone, right? There's the problems with disposal. I mean, if we didn't have the societal innovation, right? They're still benefiting society, right? But then they have these side repercussions. So if we're just focusing on, oh yeah, all these social, environmental aspects, I mean, is that going to inhibit innovation in the long run?
Anybody want to? Tessa? Thank you.
Sorry. There we go. Addressing the first question, this is a real challenge that's going on within responsible investing broadly, is how can this deep understanding that it's the long term that really matters, but most of the industry itself is geared to the short term. And one of the things that's problematic is that the incentives within the financial industry are very much geared to the short term. And so the question for many of what's called the asset owners is how to think about how do you get the incentives to work in the right direction that they are more long-term than short-term. And I've spent different times in my research career sitting in investment committee meetings of some of these funds. And they're talking about the long term. They're committing to the long term. They're committing to their ESG integration, and then they spend an equally long period of time looking at their quarterly returns. And quarterly isn't every 4 years. Quarterly is every 3 months. And they're a bit schizophrenic, if you will. Between their obsession with short-term returns in terms of the performance of the portfolio versus their commitment to the long term. And I think that this is a question that they're more and more, and Rosalie might want to add to this, looking at ways for their own processes to become more long-term and for the incentives in the industry to be more long-term. In the second question, you know, these are really difficult questions. I don't myself think that bringing environmental and social and governance factors would in any way impede innovation. If anything, it would speed it up, because innovation really comes from being at the leading edge of addressing a need that's evolving within society. And as we move to more demands for addressing these environmental and social wicked problems, deep problems that we have entrenched in our society, it actually is an incentive and an encouragement for innovation rather than a detractor.
Kareem?
I would agree with Tessa, and in terms of there's a lot of opportunities in terms of being raised around innovation, new markets, new customers, new opportunities, both in and outside Canada, from all the things that we just talked about. So I would disagree quite strongly, because I see entrepreneurs every day that are taking advantage of that. And I think maybe on the first question, and I interpreted it a bit differently, but for any one of you that's looking to work for, let's say, any company, and you had a choice between two companies that, one had a good track record around social responsibility in whatever form it was, and another one didn't, who would you pick? You would pick the one, arguably, that had some kind of positive record, but also you would look a bit more long-term. You know, if you worked for a company, let's say, that you knew was at risk of potentially, being a company that you didn't want to be known to be working for, would you pick that if you had an equal choice today? Now, obviously, choices are not equal, but I would just say that particularly among many of you, I think, having talked to a lot of younger people at universities in particular, if you do have a choice around whether your company as a whole reflects your values, I think people tend to pick those kinds of companies, assuming a lot of other things are equal. That's quite different than maybe how things were 10 or 15 years ago, when maybe money was the primary motivator. Now, social responsibility and reputational risk are actually big factors in employee decision-making, and managers are understanding that. So I actually think it's a much bigger issue than people give it credit for.
Sorry, Nancy, did you have anything to add to that? Okay, or Cameron? Okay.
In terms of the second question, I think necessity is the mother of invention, and so when we constrain the social and environmental impacts that a certain industry can have, it forces innovation. And in an industry, the combustion engine hasn't really changed that much since it was invented. So I think that's an industry that could really use some innovation by forcing it to actually go in a different direction. And the energy industry is a place where there's a need for it, and there's a lot of innovation going on simply because we're deciding and realizing we can't go down the path we are. In terms of the first question, I definitely agree. In my experience of a number of different corporate campaigning scenarios and campaigns I've worked on, corporations tend to respond better to the stick and then the carrot than just the carrot first. Mm-hmm. They'll move very slowly if you just lay down the carrot, But if you hit them with the stick first, or if you hit one of them with the stick first, the rest of them run for the carrot because they don't want to get hit by the stick. So I think this idea of how do we expedite this change, I think that's very true. And I think divestment, especially around energy and fossil fuels, is one of the best tools we have to expedite the shift we need away from the bad and towards the good.
Capital market sanctions can help too. Rosalie, you don't have anything? Okay, so we've got 3 more questions. So we'll start Heather and then the 2 at this microphone. And I'd ask you just to keep your questions as short as possible, please.
Okay, I'll keep this very short. So I want to bring up the question of standards. So because I'm working as a consultant in the corporate social responsibility field, and corporate social responsibility can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And when we're talking about mutual funds, investments, things that are very complicated, I'm not an economist. You know, do you find it sort of a challenge to create, to have just a platform or a bottom line of what the standard is for social investment? Because it seems to me like there's a lot of different opinions about what this actually is and what this actually means. I'll leave it at that. That's my question.
Thank you, Heather. We'll go on. Just about 3 questions.
Hi, my name is Lydia. So a lot of the conversation has been about socially responsible investing, but I wanted to ask about the impact investing side. So we mentioned it's still in its infancy, and it's kind of risky for institutional investors, but at the same time, there's not as many products out there, and there's more supply than demand for retail investors. So I'm just wondering who has access to impact investing currently, and where's that money coming from?
Thank you. And the last question.
Hi, sorry. My name is Danielle. I'm part of Fossil Free U Ottawa. I guess my question mostly for Rosalie as a Desjardins member. I just want to take this opportunity to kind of issue a challenge to Desjardins to take on the steps for divestment, whether it's planning for it, whether it's talking about it internally a little bit more. I think you mentioned, I want to challenge a bit your 50% kind of reduction in return rate. I think in this last 10 years, things have changed considerably. We are entering an age where extreme energy is more and more the norm, where we're talking about tar sands, with the BP stuff, fracking. Stuff's changing enough that it's becoming more and more of a risk, and carbon bubble and stuff like that. I guess my specific question is maybe you can talk a little bit more about the steps you've taken around divestment from other sectors. I feel like you've done a bit around the tobacco, weapons, and nuclear. Maybe it's not a full divestment, maybe it is, but maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Thank you very much. So who would like to start?
About the standards in the SRI?
Yes. Why don't you start?
I can take that question. So Desjardins and NEI are the 2 only firm that I know in Canada who have pledged in favor of standards. I think so far we're the only ones, really. And we're the biggest ones, that's why, probably. In Europe, they're looking at it. There's codes of transparency in France. There is not 1 label, now there's 2 labels and norms and all of that. So I think we'll get to that and we'll need that. But first, we need to raise awareness and make sure that people know about responsible investment. One of our last poll in Quebec, it turned out that 60% of Quebecers had never heard of that. So after awareness, we need to educate investors and then help them make some informed decisions, and then maybe we'll be able to talk about certifications, labels, and standards. But we are very much in favor of that. We are in favor of a mechanism that will help investors make informed choices. Or maybe I'll go back to the divestment afterwards. No? Now? Okay, so the only 3 sectors we're divested officially from is tobacco, nuclear weapon. It's based on public poll that a vast majority of Canadians have told us that they don't want their investment to finance those sectors, and they don't want to profit from those sectors with their financial returns because those are very dangerous for human health. I don't think we're there yet with fossil fuel, unless I'm mistaken. I think we have polls that are, so we need a very firm signal, and we're listening. And believe it or not, I'm trying to influence my colleagues. So I think that we are intelligent enough so we can come up with the product. Once we do, we'll need to have investors investing in it because we need to have a commercial success. Otherwise, the product will be pulled back. So I think that it's something that we need to work on. But we need, again, more research to be able to understand, because if we divest from fossil fuel, it means that we need to question our consumption of fossil fuel, right? If we don't want to invest in companies, then it means that if we are coherent, we don't want their product as well, right? So that's, that's a question that is very, a tough one for every one of us.
Nancy?
Yeah, so just a comment on the CSR reporting. And I think that's a natural progression of what we're doing here. And so if you look in France, for example, and in Scandinavia, they are very well developed in this area. And in France as well, they also have SRI rating agencies, so similar to Standard & Poor's and Moody's, where they actually come in and rate your activities. And so Canada, is a little bit further behind, and I'm dealing more in raising US dollars, and a lot of those investors are coming from either the US or internationally, and they're still trying to figure this piece out. So we're working together with investors and with other issuers like EDC to develop a scorecard. And so it starts small, and we show it to them, and we get their feedback, and they tell us if they want more and in what direction. And because there's such wide scale and scope in this industry, we do what we can with what we have. And if that's acceptable to the investors that we're selling to, that's great. It may be for some, but not for others. So I would encourage you to look internationally, and you'll see pieces of information there that can guide you in your work. And then there was another question with respect to how do we get more access to some of these other types of investments. From where I sit, it's incumbent on the institutional investors to drive this, and then ultimately that will reach the retail investor, which are the individual Canadians. And there are things happening internationally. There's been an immunization bond. There's bond that help educate children whose parents have been to prison. There's all kinds of neat stuff that's happening, but it's still not at the level where individuals can have access to that. But the opening statements were, we've come a long way in a short period of time, and I would encourage you to continue to look for these things because they will become available. And I think every individual has a voice, and at some point you will be working, you will be contributing to you'll have a bank. And I would say that, don't underestimate the power of the individual voice to say, this is the type of thing I want to see. And so in time and with, the movement, the collective movement, you will galvanize change.
Karim?
So great comments from Nancy. And I think just to build on that around the impact investing side, there's two set of standards you should know about if you're an investor. It's a thing called the Impact Reporting and Investment Standards. That's IRIS. If you're a company, there's a form of company called B Corps, which stands for Benefit Corporations. Again, that's a way to embed your mission within, everything that you do. So they have a rating system, et cetera. Both of these are not perfect. They both need a lot more work, but those are good starts in terms of ratings. Just on the product side, the report that I referred to, we actually cataloged existing product in the impact investment marketplace in Canada. Surprisingly, we found 45, which was stunning to me too. So most of them are institutional, but I think about 30 or 40% are accessible via retail investment. So to at least many of you, hopefully most of you, and that isn't including SRI product. So we looked at impact investing products specifically. So that number is actually higher if you include SRI product, which I think is a good sign. A few years ago, again, that number probably would have been 10 at max.
Tessa, do you have something to add?
No, I knew that Karim would have the State of the Nation and Nancy and Rosalie would answer the other questions.
Okay, Cameron, any last words?
Obviously. Just on the standards and sort of thing like this, and that there isn't really a common standard, but I think one of the things to reflect on, or that I take out of this, is hearing everyone else on the panel speak, is that when we think about this, there's two worlds right now. There's the politically possible, and that's where my colleagues on the panel all work. And that's where what the system is right now. And I feel like I often work in, as we talk about this movement, we work in making the possible political. So trying to shift this further to the far left is sort of what we're working on. And I think that that's around the idea of to keep pushing. And I think through that, we can actually start to see a lot more of these standards, a lot more standardized practices, and a lot more things that actually answer a lot of these open-ended questions, I think, that have been greatly raised today. And I would also challenge, we've got almost 50 campaigns across the country now working on divestment. We'll have customers for your divested options. So if you can get there, we'll provide you with the people to buy them.
Rosalie.
Yeah. No, I'm sure you do. I'd like you to convince some wealthy people as well. It would help.
Okay. There's a professor out at UBC called Benjamin Richardson, who's written a very good book on socially responsible investment and the environment, which is very interesting and worth a read. And it deals with a lot of the legal and philosophical issues about socially responsible investment. So with that, I'll turn the word over to Philippe and Anaïs. And give you back the microphone.
Before we end this seminar, we would like to thank our distinguished panelists for sharing their wealth of knowledge with us, as well as Penelope Simmons here for accepting to moderate this session. A token of our appreciation will be handed to you shortly.
Nous aimerions également remercier Dr. Alvin Riding, Dr. Mewako Nitani et plus particulièrement Brian Carrière pour leurs judicieux conseils et pour tout leur support. Merci infiniment.
We would also like to thank the rest of our organizing committee, Jan Jones and Véronique Majot back there, for all their dedication, their hard work, and making this event a success. Thank you. Next, of course, we would like to thank our sponsors, which consists of the Telfer School of Management, the Political Studies Department, Graduate Student Association, the Association des étudiants diplômés en études politiques, QP 2626, and finally, the Ontario Public Interest Research Group, Ottawa. Without your support, this event would have never taken place. So thank you. Last but not least, we would like to thank every one of you for attending this seminar. We will keep you informed on further initiatives the university takes on social, ethical, and responsible investment. You're welcome to stay for refreshments in the back. Everything is compostable or recyclable, so please use the proper bins. On this note, we thank you again, and have a great evening. Thank you.